The Imperial Empire had watched from afar, with curiosity as humanity blossomed from its early beginnings. Their scouts had been sent to observe the primitive species that called themselves humans, and their conclusion had been the same for centuries. Earth was a backwater world full of unrefined life and technology, too weak to be a threat. Even so, they made a note of the planet's existence and moved on to conquer more promising worlds across the galaxy. But now something was different. The Empire's supreme leader had decided it was time to harvest the resources of Earth to fuel their ever-expanding war machine. The decision was made, and the Imperial fleet was dispatched. The fleet that approached Earth was like nothing the humans had ever seen. Hundreds of massive warships adorned with strange alien technology that pulsed with dark energy. Their cannons were as large as entire cities, and their armor thick enough to withstand the most powerful of weapons. It was a force of unimaginable scale. The humans watched as the fleet began to enter Earth's orbit. As they watched in awe, they had no idea the fate that awaited them. At the heart of the planet, humanity had spent decades building something that they had kept secret from the rest of the galaxy, a system of defenses designed to protect them from any kind of external threat, a network of orbital stations designed to intercept enemy vessels before they could get too close on the ground, a series of ancient bunkers hidden deep beneath the Earth's crust, ready to rise from their slumber in times of need. Humans had always known they were vulnerable, but they had prepared in silence, and now it was time for their defenses to wake up. As the Imperial fleet began to deploy its shock troops across Earth's surface, their sensors detected something strange. The systems they used to detect enemy technology couldn't recognize the readings coming from Earth. They couldn't understand why their weapon systems weren't working properly, why their energy readings were fluctuating wildly, and why their ships felt so heavy, as if something was pushing against them from all sides. In the depths of the planet's atmosphere, ancient satellite systems powered on for the first time in centuries and sent a signal into the void, a signal that reached deep into the Imperial fleet's command network. But their systems rejected it. The human technology was not supposed to be capable of this kind of complexity. Their ships shuddered as the first blast of electromagnetic interference hit their systems. On Earth, chaos erupted as the first signs of the invasion spread across the globe. People panicked, unsure of what was happening or how to respond. The Imperial fleet was too overwhelming. They thought, how could they possibly stand a chance against such a force? The streets were flooded with fear and confusion, but there was a quiet realization growing in the hearts of humanity's leaders. They knew this wasn't the end. They knew that Earth's defenses had been dormant for too long, but now they were awake. As the Imperial fleet began to fire their first shots on Earth's cities, they were met with an unexpected response. The city's shields flickered to life and absorbed the incoming blasts with ease. The Imperial ships had underestimated the humans. They had underestimated Earth. The Imperial fleet's first strike had been met with resistance that left their commanders confused. Their weapons were powerful enough to decimate any enemy on their path, but now they faced a force they hadn't predicted. Earth's cities had risen to defend themselves with shields that were stronger than anything they had encountered before. But it wasn't just the cities that were fighting back. Hidden across the globe, humanity's most secret defense systems had been activated without warning, and their enemies had no way to understand what they were dealing with. As the Imperial ships began to regroup after their first failed bombardment, the humans made their move. Orbital defense platforms that had been thought to be little more than outdated relics came alive with a fury. The Imperial fleet's communication systems buzzed with alarms as Earth's weapons systems locked onto their ships with deadly accuracy. The Imperial commanders attempted to counter the attacks by deploying their advanced fighter crafts, but the humans had anticipated this too. Earth's air forces launched with devastating speed, intercepting the alien fighters before they could even get within range of their targets. The Imperial ships tried to reposition themselves in a desperate attempt to avoid further damage, but the humans were relentless. Earth's network of satellites and defense systems kept up their barrage, turning the tide of battle in ways the invaders could never have imagined. The Imperials could not fathom how a species they had considered so primitive was managing to hold their ground against such overwhelming odds. On the surface, the scene was no less chaotic. The first wave of Imperial soldiers had landed in key locations around the world, expecting to easily conquer human cities and establish a foothold for their empire. They were met instead by an army of humans who had been preparing for just such an attack. Earth's military, thought to be weak and outdated, was no longer what it had once been. Humans fought with a fierce determination. Unlike anything the invaders had ever witnessed, their soldiers were equipped with weapons and technologies that far surpassed what the Imperials had expected, and their knowledge of terrain and strategy made every battle a nightmare for the invaders. The alien soldiers struggled to adapt as they found themselves outmatched at every turn. Human soldiers moved through the cities like shadows. Their tactics were unorthodox and unpredictable. They fought as though they were one with the environment, using everything from the terrain to urban structures to their advantage in ways the invaders could never have anticipated. Back in orbit, the Imperial fleet's commanding officers were growing increasingly frustrated. Their forces were being picked apart by weapons they couldn't counter and tactics they couldn't understand. Their grand strategy was falling apart under the weight of humanity's surprising defenses. It was supposed to be an easy victory, but now the invaders were losing precious time and resources. As the humans continued to strike back, the Imperial fleet began to realize something they hadn't accounted for. Humans were more than just resourceful. They were adaptable. They could learn and adjust in the heat of battle in ways no alien force had ever done before. The invaders were starting to understand that they were not fighting a primitive species. They were fighting a species capable of extraordinary resilience and innovation. But the invaders refused to retreat. They had come to Earth to conquer, and they would stop at nothing to achieve their goal. But they were beginning to fear that they might have underestimated humanity far more than they had realized. The Imperial fleet's command ship, a colossal vessel brimming with weapons and shields, began to shift in position as it sought to reorganize after the unexpected resistance it had encountered. The ship's commanders quickly realized they were facing more than just an Earth that had managed to defend itself with a few scattered relics of old technology. This was something far more organized and far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Their technology, so advanced in comparison to anything humanity had produced, was now facing off against something that they couldn't quite understand. As the Imperials scrambled to adapt to Earth's rapidly evolving defense systems, the humans had already taken things a step further. Hidden beneath Earth's surface, ancient bunkers, once thought to be nothing more than a relic of a bygone era, powered up with silent precision. Deep within these underground facilities, highly classified weapons systems were activated and sent across the planet like a storm waiting to strike back. Humanity had anticipated this moment, the time when their world would be threatened, and had spent decades refining their secret arsenal. Orbital defense platforms, once thought to be a failed experiment, had now transformed into a deadly force. They had been designed to intercept and destroy any incoming threats, and with Earth's advanced AI systems coordinating the attacks, the humans were able to calculate the precise weaknesses in the Imperial fleet's defenses. Within minutes, the satellites began firing focused energy beams at the command ships, striking with such precision that the Imperial shields were rendered useless. One by one, their massive vessels began to break apart under the relentless assault. The Imperial fleet's central command scrambled for a counterattack, but they were losing control fast. Their communication systems were being jammed, and their pilots were struggling to coordinate their efforts on the ground. Things were no better. The first wave of Imperial soldiers, who had initially thought they could easily overpower Earth's armies, now found themselves surrounded by a relentless human force. The humans had not only adapted to the technological threats, but had also developed guerrilla warfare tactics that exploited every advantage their environment offered. The Imperial soldiers, with their advanced armor and weapons, found themselves at a severe disadvantage against the humans who had mastered every type of terrain across the globe, from the dense jungles to the urban labyrinths of megacities. Humanity had crafted the perfect strategy to fight back against the invaders. The invaders' sophisticated technology and brute strength were no match for the cunning of Earth's soldiers, who moved with precision, striking when least expected and disappearing before the aliens could even react. The human forces were more than just a military. They were a people united by the will to survive, and protect their home. Their leaders, both military and civilian, worked together in perfect harmony, coordinating every strike with flawless timing. Even the most advanced Imperial weaponry failed to break through the determination of a species that refused to be conquered. Back in orbit, the Imperial fleet was struggling to maintain its formation, and the realization began to set in. They had underestimated Earth's readiness. They had thought themselves invincible, but now they were finding themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered at every turn. And despite their best efforts, Earth's defenses only seemed to be growing stronger with every passing moment. The Empire had come to Earth expecting an easy victory, expecting to crush this insignificant world under the weight of their superior technology and weapons. But now, as their fleet began to falter and their ground forces were pushed back, they had no choice but to confront the grim truth. They were facing something they had never expected, an opponent who would not simply surrender, not simply fall in line with their Imperial will. A race that, despite its humble beginnings, was showing the universe what it meant to fight for survival against all odds. Humanity was not as weak as they thought, and with every passing second, they were proving it. The Imperial fleet, once poised to crush the human resistance under the weight of its power, now found itself in chaos. The command ship, which had been the centerpiece of their entire invasion strategy, was beginning to falter. Its shields were no longer holding up against the focused energy beams from Earth's orbital platforms, which seemed to strike with uncanny accuracy. The Imperials had deployed their own countermeasures, trying to jam human communications and disrupt their weapon systems, but Earth's defenses had anticipated this. Their tech had been built specifically for resilience and adaptability, and the invaders were beginning to see the scale of the mistake they had made. Human technology, once dismissed as primitive, was now outmatching the Empire's most advanced warships. Each strike from Earth's orbital defense systems seemed to rip apart the Imperial ships piece by piece. Their once impenetrable shields flickered and failed under the relentless assault. The Imperial fleet's commanders could only watch in helpless disbelief as their ships were disintegrated one after another. The tide of battle had turned, and it was clear that Earth's defenses had been underestimated in ways that the invaders couldn't fathom. Down on the surface, the invaders' ground forces were also beginning to realize just how far out of their depth they were. The initial landings had been disastrous, but the second wave of invaders had come with higher expectations. They had anticipated more resistance than before, but nothing had prepared them for what they encountered as they descended into Earth's cities and forests. They found themselves caught in an elaborate web of traps, set by humans who knew the land better than anyone. The Imperial soldiers had been trained to fight in open battlefields with advanced weaponry, but they had never faced the kind of urban warfare humanity was capable of in the sprawling megacities, where human ingenuity had long shaped the landscape. The invaders were trapped in narrow streets and towering buildings. They were unfamiliar with the terrain, and outnumbered by forces they couldn't track or target. Humanity had learned long ago how to turn its own cities into deadly weapons by using them as labyrinths against invaders. Their soldiers, adept at moving in and out of the shadows, struck swiftly and silently. They used the skyscrapers as perches for sniper fire and set ambushes with traps that caught the Imperials off guard. Every corner became a danger zone, every street a battleground. In the dense forests and jungles, the human forces employed guerrilla tactics honed over centuries. Their knowledge of the land gave them the upper hand as they fought back with a surprising ferocity. Their weapons, while not as advanced as the Imperials, were well suited for their environment. They fought from the cover of trees and underground bunkers, using explosives and energy weapons to disorient and destroy the invaders' advanced tech. The Imperials had no idea how to handle the constant pressure from an enemy that seemed to materialize out of nowhere and strike without warning. On the Imperial command ship, panic began to set in. Their leaders, who had once been so confident in their superiority, now found themselves scrambling for answers. The fleet was losing its grip, and the ground forces were failing to secure strategic positions across the planet. Earth's defenses had proven to be not only strong but intelligently coordinated, and the invaders were realizing that their technological superiority was not enough to defeat the humans. They had underestimated Earth's ability to adapt. Its people had proven to be just as resilient as the systems they had built to protect themselves. Desperation gripped the Imperials as they realized their only option was to escalate the conflict. But even as they prepared to unleash their ultimate weapon, they couldn't shake the feeling that the tide had already shifted. Earth's victory was no longer just possible, it was becoming inevitable, and the invaders had no idea how to stop it. As the Imperial fleet's leaders huddled in their command centers, the desperation among them grew palpable. Their once pristine ships were battered and broken, their weapons ineffective against Earth's ingenious defenses. The first phase of their invasion had failed, and now they scrambled to devise a new strategy. They had brought the most advanced technology the galaxy had to offer, and yet they were being dismantled by a species they had deemed too weak to pose a threat. The realization struck them hard. Earth's unexpected resilience wasn't just a fluke. It was part of a much larger, more terrifying truth. Humanity had been preparing for this day for centuries. Back on Earth, as the battle raged, humanity's leaders realized that the tide was turning in their favor, but they also knew they had to act swiftly to prevent the Imperials from escalating the conflict even further. Earth's defense network, which had been a passive deterrent for decades, had proven far more capable than anyone had imagined, but it wouldn't hold forever. The invaders were bound to find a way to adapt, and humanity needed to ensure the upper hand was kept. Behind the scenes, a team of Earth's brightest minds and military strategists worked tirelessly to harness the full potential of their defenses. They had been preparing for this moment for years, and now the fruits of their labor were coming to life. The AI systems coordinating Earth's orbital weapons began to tap into a secret reserve of ancient technology, buried deep beneath the surface of the planet. Technology far more advanced than anything the Imperials had encountered in their conquest of the galaxy. This hidden arsenal, long thought to be lost to time, was a game-changer. The humans had recovered ancient blueprints and technologies from forgotten civilizations long before the Imperial fleet ever thought to set their sights on Earth. These weapons, unlike anything the Imperials had ever seen, could disrupt the most sophisticated alien technology and strike at their heart with precision so flawless that not even the Imperials' advanced shields could protect them. Meanwhile, on the ground, the battle continued to intensify. The Imperial soldiers, once so confident in their ability to crush the human resistance, now found themselves in a nightmare of their own making. Every move they made was countered with brutal efficiency. The humans had adapted to their tactics faster than the invaders could even anticipate. The streets and forests were full of hidden dangers, each one more deadly than the last. Humanity fought not just for survival, but for something deeper, for the future of their world. In a key battle, in one of Earth's largest megacities, a group of elite human soldiers trapped a large contingent of Imperial ground forces in a reinforced sector of the city. The Imperials, trained for large-scale battles, were now faced with a new type of enemy, a small, well-coordinated human force that used their surroundings to gain an advantage. The battle turned into an urban maze, with the Imperials losing soldiers at every turn, trapped in the shadows of the city, with no idea how to escape their predicament. On the Imperial command ship, the situation grew direr as reports flooded in from all fronts. The fleet had suffered catastrophic damage, and the ground forces were being pushed back to their landing zones. The Imperial commanders finally realized that the full scale of their failure was unfolding before them. Earth was no longer just resisting. It was organizing, adapting, and overcoming their superior technology with a ruthless efficiency that left the invaders reeling. The desperation within the Imperial ranks began to boil over. Some of the fleet's commanders called for the use of their last resort, a weapon so destructive that it could obliterate an entire planet. But their supreme leader, though furious, hesitated. The fear of what might happen if they unleashed such a force on Earth, a world that had surprised them time and again, was enough to make even the most hardened Imperial generals pause. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were unsure if they could even defeat them. As the Imperial fleet wavered, Earth's leaders, buoyed by their success, began to prepare for the final phase of their counteroffensive, knowing that the worst was yet to come. They made one last push to break the Imperial resolve before they could regroup and retaliate with their ultimate weapon. It was clear now that humanity was not just fighting for survival. They were fighting to protect their home and to send a message to the galaxy. No empire would ever subjugate Earth. With the Imperial fleet in disarray and their ground forces pushed back to their landing zones, the Imperial command was growing more and more desperate. Their last hope was to use a weapon they had been saving for just such an occasion. A weapon of unimaginable power that could obliterate entire cities in the blink of an eye. A weapon that could turn Earth's surface into a wasteland with a single strike. But even as the fleet's commanders debated the use of this devastating tool, Earth's defenses were already preparing for a new phase of the battle. Beneath the surface of the planet, deep in the forgotten bunkers that had remained dormant for centuries, humanity's most powerful weapon systems were coming online. These weapons, a mix of ancient technologies recovered from Earth's distant past and newly developed human ingenuity, had been designed to ensure humanity's survival, no matter the threat, but no one had ever expected them to be needed quite like this. As the systems powered up, they sent a pulse of energy through Earth's network of satellites, briefly illuminating the night sky before the lights flickered and the first wave of attacks began across the world. Military leaders gathered in hidden bunkers and command centers, watching as the once dormant technologies sprang to life. They could feel the tide of the battle turning. But they knew they could not be complacent. The Imperials were still a formidable force, and they were far from defeated, but now they had a new weapon to deploy, one that was far more advanced than anything the invaders had brought with them. The ancient weapons that had long been buried beneath the surface of Earth began to activate with eerie precision. Large-scale energy cannons that had been forgotten for centuries now hummed with life, their immense power charging up and sending waves of energy that shook the Imperial ships in orbit below. Humanity's AI systems had finally unlocked the ability to use this long-lost arsenal, and now the Imperials were about to experience the full force of humanity's hidden power. On the ground, the human forces were in the midst of their final push against the invaders. They had already pushed back the first wave of Imperial soldiers, and now they were using the terrain to their advantage in ways the invaders could not anticipate. Guerrilla tactics had become second nature for the human soldiers, who had grown up in the world of rapid technological advancement and constant conflict. They moved with a purpose, striking the Imperial forces wherever they were weakest. The Imperials, stunned by the resilience of the humans, were caught off guard by the sudden surge of coordinated resistance that seemed to appear from nowhere. Every time they thought they had a foothold, the humans would strike back with overwhelming force, using weapons they couldn't understand and strategies they couldn't predict. In the forests, mountains, and cities, the battle was becoming increasingly brutal, but the humans were not giving up. They had lived through countless challenges, surviving on a planet full of natural disasters, fierce competition, and hostile forces, and they were not about to lose their home to an invader from the stars. Back in space, the Imperial fleet's central command had no idea how to counter the new threat from below. Earth's ancient weapon systems were wreaking havoc on their ships, rendering their advanced shields useless one by one. The once mighty Imperial ships were being torn apart by the relentless barrage from Earth's orbit. The fleet tried to regroup, but their communications were constantly jammed by the human-controlled satellites now in full operation. Inside the Imperial command ship, the leaders were growing increasingly frantic. Their superiority, once assured, was now in tatters. Every plan they had crafted had been destroyed by humanity's unexpected adaptability and resilience. The weapon they had hoped to use to finish the battle was now their last option. But even then, doubts lingered. Was the price of such destruction worth it? Could they even win at this point? The Imperials were no longer just fighting humans. They were fighting against a species that had come together in defense of their home with an ingenuity and willpower that was now driving them to victory. No longer were they a primitive world, they were a force to be reckoned with, a species that would stop at nothing to protect their world, and they were proving that even against the most powerful empire in the galaxy, Earth was not to be conquered. With each passing moment, the Empire's grip on Earth weakened, and the invaders were beginning to understand the truth. They had misjudged humanity, and now, with Earth's ancient weapons and people working together, they were about to feel the full fury of a world they never thought would fight back. The Imperial fleet had begun to crumble beneath the relentless assault from Earth's newly awakened defenses. Their once mighty command ships, now crippled by the devastating energy pulses fired from Earth's orbital platforms, were struggling to stay operational. Communications between ships were down, and their fleets were scattered across the stars like shattered glass. The Empire's hope of a swift victory had turned into a nightmare. They could not escape. The grand weapon that had once been their trump card now seemed to be nothing more than a distant, unfeasible threat against a world that refused to surrender on Earth's surface. Humanity's victory was becoming increasingly tangible with every passing moment. The once mighty invaders were pushed further back into the corners of the world. Their soldiers had no choice but to retreat, caught in traps and ambushes set by humans who had anticipated their every move. Earth's cities were teeming with soldiers, farmers, engineers, and civilians who had joined together in one cohesive force, driven by a singular purpose: to protect their home, to protect their families, and the future of their species. Humanity had learned quickly and adapted with remarkable precision. The Imperial forces, who had initially believed that the Earth's primitive state would leave them vulnerable, were now being outmaneuvered at every turn. Their advanced weaponry was no match for Earth's resourcefulness and tenacity. The invaders could no longer rely on their superior technology to dominate, and the more they fought, the more they realized they were losing a battle against an enemy that refused to bow. The once unthinkable had become possible. Earth's ground forces, fighting tooth and nail in every urban center and jungle, had forced the Imperial soldiers into retreating pockets. They were no longer the invading army they had once been, but a group of disjointed and desperate forces trying to survive against an enemy they had underestimated. The Imperial soldiers' morale had begun to waver as they realized they were not fighting against an alien species that would bend to their will, but a people whose unity and resolve were stronger than any weapon they had ever used. Back in space, the Imperial fleet was in full disarray. Their ships, battered and broken, had no hope of regaining control of Earth's atmosphere. One by one, they fell, their once imposing hulls shattering under the intense bombardment from Earth's new wave of orbital weapons. Earth had learned how to wield ancient technologies, and it was clear now that their defense systems were far more advanced than the Imperials could ever have guessed. As the fleet's command ship struggled to stay intact, the Imperial Supreme Leader, who had been calm and confident in the beginning, now found himself faced with an overwhelming decision. Should he order the deployment of the final weapon, the one capable of wiping Earth off the map entirely? It was their last resort, a weapon so destructive that it could annihilate entire continents with a single strike. But even now, with everything on the line, the Supreme Leader hesitated. Doubts crept into his mind. What if the weapon failed? What if the human resilience was too much to destroy? What if it made them even more dangerous than they already were? Meanwhile, back on Earth, the human leadership understood the gravity of the situation. Their victory was close, but they knew that the Imperials would not give up so easily. They were likely preparing to deploy their ultimate weapon, the one that could end everything in one stroke. And though humanity had successfully pushed back their forces on the ground and in orbit, the war was not over yet. The human forces prepared for the final stages of the conflict. They knew that to truly ensure Earth's survival, they needed to prevent the Imperials from launching their last-ditch weapon. Humanity's military strategists worked in unison with their scientists and engineers, creating a plan that would allow them to strike at the heart of the Imperial fleet before they could activate their weapon. It was now or never. Earth's defenses had held, but the invaders were not yet beaten. As the clock ticked down and the final confrontation loomed, the resolve of humanity hardened. Their world had been threatened, and they would not let it fall without a fight. The Imperials had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but now Earth had become a force that would never be overlooked again, and in the final stages of this battle, humanity was prepared to show the galaxy the true power of their species. The time had come for the final confrontation. The Imperials, battered and disorganized, were left with no choice but to deploy their ultimate weapon. The decision was made in desperation, and their fleet began to prepare the launch sequence. The weapon, known only to the highest ranks of the Empire, was capable of wiping out entire continents, reducing Earth to nothing more than a barren, lifeless rock. The Supreme Leader knew the weapon's power, and he knew that deploying it might be the only chance they had left to survive, but there was no guarantee that it would even succeed. Earth had proven itself far more resilient than anything they could have imagined on the ground. Humanity's leaders were already well aware of the impending threat. The final weapon had been detected by Earth's advanced surveillance systems, and every military strategist knew what had to be done. The stakes could not have been higher. If the Imperials succeeded in launching the weapon, nothing would be left of Earth's cities, its forests, or its oceans. The human race would be extinguished in an instant, and yet, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, the resolve of humanity never wavered. Coordinated from deep underground bunkers, Earth's final plan was set into motion. It was a daring, almost suicidal move, but it was the only chance they had left. With the Imperial fleet scattered and vulnerable, humanity would strike their final blow. They had developed a new weapon, a laser system so powerful that it could penetrate even the most advanced shields the Imperials had relied on to protect their vessels. This weapon was housed in one of the hidden bunkers, and it would be launched from the surface straight toward the heart of the Imperial command ship. As Earth's military mobilized and prepared to launch their final assault, their soldiers, air forces, and ground forces moved with a single purpose. The Imperial fleet was being surrounded, and their ships were no longer capable of holding the skies above Earth. The Imperials, who had once thought they would annihilate humanity in minutes, were now fighting for their very survival. On the command ship of the Imperial fleet, the Supreme Leader watched as the countdown to launch began. There was no turning back now. They had no more options. Their forces had been decimated, and the remaining ships were too weak to defend their final weapon. He hesitated, but only for a moment. He knew the consequences of not using it. Earth's forces would overwhelm them completely, but even as he issued the order, deep down he could feel the fear. It was not fear of losing the battle, but fear of what would come next. As the weapon's countdown reached its final seconds, the Supreme Leader's heart raced. He knew that once it was deployed, there would be no going back. But as the final moment approached, something unexpected happened. A massive surge of energy from the planet's surface suddenly interrupted the signal that was guiding the weapon's launch. The human laser weapon had been deployed, and it struck the Imperial command ship with such overwhelming power that the ship's shields collapsed in an instant. The blast hit the heart of the vessel, and the ship's core exploded in a flash of blinding light. The shockwave from the explosion sent ripples through the Imperial fleet, and many of the remaining ships began to disintegrate under the sheer force of the attack. The once formidable Empire's entire fleet, reduced to floating debris in space, was now helpless. The weapon, their ultimate weapon, had been destroyed in the blink of an eye. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Humanity had won the impossible victory. The invaders, who had come to Earth with dreams of conquest, had been utterly defeated. Their fleets lay in ruins, and their last hope was gone. But it wasn't just a victory over invaders. It was a victory of the human spirit, a victory that showed the galaxy that no matter how advanced an enemy might be, Earth would never back down. In the aftermath, humanity stood united, not just as survivors, but as victors. The people of Earth, from every nation and every walk of life, had come together to repel an unimaginable threat. Their strength, their adaptability, and their will to fight had proven that the Empire had underestimated them at every turn. Earth was not just a backwater planet to be conquered. It was a force of nature in its own right. As the remnants of the Imperial fleet limped away, retreating into the darkness of space, Humanity looked to the stars with newfound confidence. They had proven themselves capable of more than anyone had expected. They had shown that they would protect their home at any cost, and now they were ready to face whatever future lay ahead with their heads held high, knowing that the galaxy had learned one powerful truth: never underestimate Earth.